and the colleagues online from the speaker panel. My name is Julia Egerer. I would like to welcome you all to this fourth webinar on ground handling. We are going to look at industry standards today. Industry standards is an area that you have asked us to focus on because it came up in some of the questions that we have received on the previous webinars. And what have we done so far? So where are we coming from? This is actually the fourth webinar focusing on ground handling, on the ground handling regulation, the new regulation that will apply in a couple of years. We already had in 2025 3 webinars, just to remind ourselves, and you can find information about all those webinars on the EASA website. We had a webinar on how you can prepare yourselves for the new ground handling regulations. We had a webinar on safety culture and SMS, and also recently on oversight of the competent authorities. But today, the topic is different. Today, we are going to talk about industry standards. What are they and how the competent authorities use them, how the ground handling organizations are using them. Looking ahead into this year, 2026, I'd like to remind everybody that we are still planning 4 more webinars. So 4 more webinars in 2026 in the months of May, September, and December. So please continue to give us ideas also in the Slido chat, where you can tell us what are the topics that are important for you. Now, talking about Slido, I guess most of you who have followed our ground handling webinars are familiar with Slido, but maybe not all of you. So constantly during this webinar, you're going to see on your page, on your webinar page, a QR code that you can just scan with your phone or any other device that you have. If you don't want to scan a QR code, you can also give in the passcode and use the Slido number that is shown there on the screen. And we would really like to encourage you to only use Slido for your questions. We cannot monitor 2 different tools, so please do not use the chat function. I see that many of you are saying hello from Nepal and hello from Dubai, so this is great. That's exactly acceptable. That's exactly what that chat function is for, because it gives us a nice impression of where you're joining us from. That's super. But once we are going to the questions of this webinar on what are the industry standards, how are they being used by the competent authorities, etc., please use that Slido link there. It's going to help us to already provide an answer to you, and it's going to help us also to then provide the answers online on the EASA website later on. So that's just a reminder. I'm going to get back to that a couple of times during the webinar, that we should use the Slido as much as possible. I already see we are up to 250 participants here. That's great. So thank you, participants, for joining us here. I'd like to present to you who is in the room with me today. And I'd just like to start with the people that I as well see on the screen. We're having here we're having here Barbara Schaffner. She is an inspector from the Swiss Competent Authority, FUCA. Hello, Barbara.
Hello, everybody.
Then we are also having Tihana Pejša. Tihana, you're joining us from the Croatian CAA. Hello, good afternoon. Tihana, you're muted right now. So maybe we can try if you can unmute. So it's going to work later on during the panel discussion. Can you unmute yourself, Tihana?
Okay, I'm back. Sorry for this. Yes, hello from Croatia. And that's it. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. Then we are also having Jonathan Heavey from the Irish Aviation Authority joining us for this panel.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Johnny. Then in the room with me, we have Adina Söni, the ground handling expert of EASA.
Hi, everyone.
And she's also joined by Michel Gorog, air operations expert, who's also going to do a presentation on industry standards. Hello, Michel.
Hello, everybody. Thank you.
And I'm also joined here in the room by Paul Tippe and Francesca Coloppi from the EASA ground handling team. So today we want to really focus on how the ground handling regulation enables and encourages the voluntary use of industry standards. We have two main questions in our minds, and that's why it's also good that you use the Slido to tell us what are your questions as well. So the questions we would like to have answered today, the focus of today is, how do the rules tackle industry standards? So where or how have we written the regulation to address the role of industry standards that is very important in the domain of ground handling, of course, because we didn't have a regulation for so many years. So we are all fully aware that ground handling has been operated on the basis of industry standards and will continue to use industry standards in the foreseeable future. And then for those of you who are not too familiar with the regulation yet, and also with the work that the EASA is doing, we want to provide answers to the question of what will be the role of EASA in evaluating and endorsing industry standards. So for that, we are now going to have a panel discussion with the ground handling inspectors of the competent authorities that are joining us from Croatia, Switzerland, and Ireland. And I would like to address first, or give the floor first to Michel to give us a quick update on what is the background about industry standards, how EASA has actually foreseen to regulate industry standards, what is their place, or where do they actually live inside the rules? Can you explain us a little bit more about that? And I give the floor to you. I think you have some slides prepared, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Do you want to take over the presentation, or
No, go
you
ahead.
tell me?
Go
Okay.
ahead.
Okay.
We'll do a quick presentation. However, try to highlight the main points and be clear on those two questions you have asked. So please go on. So what we will, I organize it around 3 points. Exactly what you said, what the regulation says exactly. What we have to do as a regulator, as EASA, and with the authorities, and a few questions about oversight, and some challenges and some opportunities there. So we go now on the first point, which is what the regulation says. So first, what the regulation says, it will be what an industry standard is for EASA and for the regulation, so that we will have a quick look at that. Then we will discuss the main aspect, which is ARGH OVS 310 industry standards. But we will also connect with not only ORGH Gen, which is the ground handling regulation, but also with air operations or regulation, ORGEN, to show the connection with the air operators. And I will take an example of one criterion just to show what we will do exactly in terms of evaluation. So please, next, yes. Industry standards and good practices, so we take it as together, are documented technical and operational instructions, procedures, and or specifications apply on a wide scale. Okay, and that will establish a certain number of norm, principle, criteria, whatever the content is, with the idea to give a standardized aspect for our ground handling operations. And of course, we know already many standards in the industry, and we will discuss about that. So this is the definitions, a large definitions, embedding not only proper standard, but also good practices, which will be instructions, procedures, or specifications, which are written in a control document. So the second point is, what are we saying in those regulation about industry standard? The first one is that we shall have a process to evaluate them. So this is really a question which is internal to the regulators, how we evaluate them, and we will take them for a certain value in the oversight activity. So that will be one point to discuss, and for transparency also, to give to the industry an understanding of what we will do. Org RRGH OBS 310 is with an IMC with the criteria to evaluate. So that we will discuss a little bit. Then we have ORGH, sorry, Gen 1 to 5, which is what you are supposed to do with them. And therefore, we will discuss this point. Basically, you will have to decide if you apply them or not as a ground handling operator or as an air operator also. And there is a certain flexibility. And then in the regulation, we have a list of standards which are taken as examples. So IMC ORO Gen 315B and C is important because it put a point for the air operators, who are the one who have the responsibility and the accountability for flight safety, and will contract ground handling operators to take care of the ground handling operations. So this contract goes with a ground manual that the operator will have to give to the ground handling operators, but also the ground handling organization have its own manual. So how we organize those manuals in a standardized way, that's what we believe from an EASA point of view is the safety gain of the standardization, but with good standards, of course, so that's what we want, and how we reduce the differences over time, or we justify those differences because it's still the accountability of the operator to discuss. So this is what the air operations regulation has been changing in amendment number 27. That's why you see it is in blue, not maybe very visible, but with a white character. This amendment is not in the easy rule of air operations yet. So it's important to note this, so you don't go to the easy rule and then you don't find this IMC1 or Gen 315. Next point. So the criteria, we are not going into the details. There are 7 of them. They are clear criteria to evaluate. And if I take the first one, they are developed, maintained, and endorsed with the participation of experts from relevant industry stakeholders. So we expect to evaluate these criteria, for instance, for the standards that will be used, and to ensure this, that what we will go into a little bit of details. And you can see, for instance, the number 6, they clearly identify the responsibilities of the persons involved in the application. So we expect the standards not just to be a nice text, but also having a clear understanding of the responsibilities involved. Next slide. So in the GM1 or GH Gen 1 to 5, we have the examples of standards. So what are we speaking about? Of course, IATA standards such as IGOM, HM, ESHM, DJR, and so on. Other standards used for fuel or for de-icing, the certification standards for the GSE, the ground service equipment, or also one standard for business aviation operation, the ISBAR, which is a standard for auditing these organizations, are mentioned in the regulation. That doesn't mean there will be no new standards coming up. It doesn't mean that these standards may evolve in terms of list, but definitely we have a duty, which is how are you going to accept new standards or not, or include them in the list. Yeah. A point about IMC 1 ORGH Gen 1 to 5, the use of industry standards. And here you will see that this is mirroring a little bit already what we saw with air operations. Because indeed the GH organization should document deviation and conduct safety risk assessment a little bit the same way than air operators when they diverge. And of course, we have to refer to internal compliance monitoring checks of contracted services or products, which is important also, of course, for air operators, but also for ground handling organizations that would themselves have contracted services. Now, second point is, okay, we have a criteria. How are you going to evaluate this criteria for my standard manual? Okay, and therefore we have two main actions. The first idea is to be based, it's evidence-based. So from a criteria, we developed what are the proof of the evidences that this criteria is embedded and validated. So how standards are developed, maintained, and endorsed. Are experts participating, and are experts relevant in terms of industry stakeholders? Okay, so that's the way we are going to look at the criteria, and each of them will have a different focus. And what are the evidences we can have? What we mean by evidences? For instance, if we say the standard is created through a formal structured process, this is an evidence, because we will need an evidence that there is a formal structured process of managing this standard. We need to see relevant experts participate in the standard, so how they are selected, how they are involved, and how, of course, updates are managed. So this is what we have to look at in this example. Now, how you do that? Well, basically, we have different strategies. You can go on the online site of the owner of that standard. You can go and do desktop research. You can go and visit some ground handling organization to discuss the use of standards. And of course, you can go to the owner of the standard and tell him, okay, I need some more evidences on this or that to give me a better understanding of how you work and how you respect or comply with this criteria. So that is the work to be done. And next slide, we discuss the timing. In fact, we started with AHM and IGON. In the meantime, we are going to be more precise on the process, how to evaluate, and we hope to finalize by March 2028 the list of those standards that are mentioned today in the regulation. So, last point I would like to share with you are some aspects about this oversight of ground handling organizations. First, about industry challenges. So we can go there. Basically, there is always an evaluation of pros and cons to use a standard. Obviously, some standards are very widely used, others are not. Some are used, but they are not used 100%. They are used maybe 50% or 60% or whatever. So it makes things a little bit complicated, especially when you deal with many airlines and managing different customers. And when you are one airline and you have your own issues to tackle with, and you have decided for safety reasons to change something. So these are a big challenge. However, most of the airlines are considering that it is better to have standardized practices. So they invited IATA, for instance, to propose standardized manuals, and they document their procedures accordingly. We are in the multiplayer games, and this is also an important challenge that I wanted to stress here. Air operators, ground handling organizations, and we have also accreditation bodies, because what is the difference between standards and best practices? Standards are accredited by someone who has the know-how and to accredit standards, which is not the case of best practices. Finally, we believe that industry standards will be referred to in the manuals, the ground handling manuals. We will necessarily have in those utilization things which are relevant to safety processes and things which are relevant to how I do my job, because it's a manual, and in the manual I will have to find all the information I need to operate the aircraft and to take care of it from the ground perspectives. And therefore, these manuals will be looked at differently depending how they embed the standards. But normally, from an oversight, they will be trusted, I would say, in a different way if the standard is evaluated and properly conform to the 7 criteria, and therefore will give more time for implementation checks than documentation checks. We come back to this last point of deviation of industry standards. Of course, there are, we know, depending on the operators. We want to push for a discussion about the flight safety efficiency of those standards. Therefore, if there is a deviation, we want to improve the standard, and we want to create a room for discussion there. And therefore, one aspect will be critical is what we believe are those safety processes where we should align somehow our views. This is not done yet. This will take time, and we will give us the time for it in terms of understanding that everything is not always one standard, that we may have variations in some aspects. And therefore, if we don't want standards to be too big with taking so many variations, we have to find the right balance there. So that's it. For me, I would like to conclude now on my presentation. It's a little bit longer introduction, but a short presentation. I hope you have been interested. We are the regulator will evaluate those standards. We will challenge a little bit the organization by producing those standards to make sure we understand the full criteria. We have a timeline of 2 years to do that. And basically, we expect these standards to help for the oversight and to be effective in terms of flight safety. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michel, for this good introduction, very well structured, telling us what is the role of EASA, but also telling us where those rules have a home in the framework of the ground handling regulations. So clearly we have rules on EASA's role together with the member states to evaluate industry standards. This might be new for many of you because this is actually also in our way of working. This is probably one of the first times that we have a European aviation safety rule that is so specifically addressing the role of EASA and the member states in evaluating industry standards. And then you have also explained an AMC, acceptable means of compliance, that spells out these quality criteria, I think you call them. These quality criteria on what is, I call it good industry standard, and how that actually works, and also the timeline, because of course the regulation will apply by March 2028. So we EASA and member states, we have to get started working now to be ready for March 2028. I think that's all very clear. What really struck me is that you explained the difference between best practices and industry standards. Because industry standards have to go through a sort of evaluation and they have to be accredited. But there is also something that was striking me when I learned about industry standards. There's also something that's called a recognized industry standard. So we actually have 3 different types of animals. We have best practices, we have industry standards, but then we also have recognized industry standards. So I'd like to give, first of all, a question to Adina. Can you explain to the audience here what is the difference between a recognized industry standard, for example, an ISO or a CEN and a CENELEC standard that is recognized by a standardization body in that sense, and an industry standard like the ones that Michel has just mentioned that we also have in the guidance material, like IATA's IGOM or the AHM or the cargo handling manual or the JIC standards for fueling. So can you explain a little bit what is the difference between those recognized industry standards and the other industry standards?
It's actually, you said it yourself very well. A recognized industry standard is a set of documents, manuals, procedures that receive formal recognition by a standardization body. This is also how it is explained in one of the AMCs related to this rule, ARGH OVS 310. So the very good example is the ISO standard or the EN standards or the CENELEC for electricity requirements. Those are the standardization bodies that produce or put their stamp as a standardization body on a set of documents which are later called industry standards. EASA is not a standardization body, so we will not be able to be equivalated to a standardization body. We do not put any stamp. We simply endorse the good industry standards if they pass our criteria, but we will never be considered, we are not considered, and please try to understand this difference and do not make a mistake in understanding that the EASA might be a standardization body. We are not. So the standardization bodies are ISO or EN, for example, and the examples that we put in the guidance material list of industry standards best practices include also the EN standards for ground support equipment, which are many. I think there are 19 or 20 related to the safe operation of the equipment used for ground handling services. Compared to the recognized industry standards, the EN standards, for example, for GSE, we have also the IATA documentation manuals, best practices or good practices, as they are also called, the IGOM, the airport handling manual, the cargo handling manual, the ULD regulations and everything, all the other documents created by IATA, or the documents related to the fueling operations, training of refueling operations people, the fuel quality standards, everything included in the big JIG package. Or another example are the standards used for the de-icing and anti-icing operations that are produced by SAE. Previously, we also had a European body, AEA, but it got dismantled several years ago. So probably today, everybody is using the de-icing and anti-icing standards produced by SAE. So these are the examples or the counter examples to the standardization body stamped, recognized industry standards.
And will EASA have any role in assessing and evaluating those recognized industry standards like the ZEN and the EN standard?
Yeah.
Are we going to go there as well and try to dig deep and try to find out how are these standards done?
No, because from the
Okay.
very beginning, we took a very pragmatic approach on how we regulated ground handling. And we wanted to keep the same approach in regard to the how well or how much we endorse the recognized industry standard and encourage their continued use. So when it comes to the GSE standards produced or recognized by EN, we are not going to into a deep investigation to see whether they meet all the 7 criteria in our AMC, because it doesn't make sense for us to go again over the very thorough work done by the standardization body. So when we see that the ground handling organization is using the GSE standards of EN, then we will simply accept them as they are. We will only verify whether the EN standards used by a ground handling organization actually reflect or are used to demonstrate compliance with the ground handling regulation. So we only want to see that the scope is the one that the ground handling regulation covers. That's all. But we will not go into a thorough analysis.
So
of
those recognized industry standards, they have an easy way out.
Exactly,
We would basically
exactly.
accept them as such.
Yes.
But the bulk of the industry standards, when we think about ground handling, are actually falling in the other batch. They are not recognized industry standards. They are standards like the IATA, ICOM, etc., etc. And they are called industry standards without the prefix recognized. So those are the ones that EASA is going to evaluate. So let's look a little bit at this. How is EASA going to evaluate those industry standards, and how will it actually work? So in this process of this industry standards evaluation, where we actually have a rule about it, which is quite new and novel, but we have a rule. Now we have to fill that rule with life, right? So who is going to be involved in assessing, evaluating those industry standards? Can you explain this a little bit, Michel? Who is going to be involved?
Sure.
Is it going to be the participants of this webinar? Are we going to reach out to all of them to help us evaluate the industry standards?
No, basically, there is a group which is called a network group, network of inspectors of the CAs, who is implementing that regulation. And this group has created a subgroup, which is a working group for this purpose. So I have the honor to lead that group.
So you will definitely be involved.
Yes, I am definitely involved, and we started already working on the criteria and defining this first steps in the process, which is how are we going to work concretely. And that has explained Basically, we are going to go into the understanding of the criteria, define by the word of the criteria what we would expect to see, a little bit like an auditor would expect to see something when he goes and he knows that he has to comply with something.
Mhm.
And from what we want to see, we will have to look at the evidences we can get from the owner of the standards or from any other means that will support the fact that the standard is covering the point.
So maybe we can bring up the slide where we had these AMC 2 310, so that we can help the audience to reflect again what those criteria are.
Yeah,
Because I understand
was a little bit quick on it. Yeah,
it's
maybe,
often
yeah.
quite difficult for people to remember what those criteria were. So if, for example, let's assume I'm an industry standard. Yes, exactly. That is the slide. Thank you very much. So here we have a slide that just spells out what you can also find in the easy access rules of EASA. AMC2, ARGH.OBS. OBS stands for oversight, because this is the role of the competent authority when they do oversight. 310, those 7 criteria, quality criteria. We don't call it like that, criteria. Those are those 7 criteria that are listed in this AMC. And it is now our role, and we have described that very well, that we have to evaluate them. I'm just mindful about one thing, because I think I have not explained to our audience that they can vote the questions that they are most in favor of, that they would really like to have answered. I already see that there's one question by Bartosz Fiebinger that has already received 19 support votes. That's very good. So if you are joining us now, please go to Slido and check out the questions that your colleagues have already put there. And if you find a question quite good, then give it a thumbs up, because then the chances are going to be higher that at the end of this panel, we will also be able to answer your question. So coming back to this quality criteria. If I'm an industry standard, do I have to comply with all of them? Or what is going to happen if, for example, my industry standard is very strong on being endorsed by all the participations from experts from all the relevant industry stakeholders? But that's point 1. But for example, on point 3, my industry standard is not so strong. So, i.e., it's not really based so much on experience in the field, and it really hasn't proven so. I haven't really done much testing of my industry standard. What happens then? So if I'm not so strong in one area, but I can tick the box in all the other ones.
Okay, so let's be clear on that. We have a subgroup working on this subject. We are defining the process at the same time. We are starting with AHM and IGON. We have different options, but basically, if one criteria is not covered, we will not endorse this standard. However, what is most probable here is that it will cover partially the criteria. So, for instance, we will say, it covers this aspect of the criteria, but not really what we would expect the standard to cover. And then we will do as an authority does, we'll put a remark and we'll try to monitor this issue with the owner of the standard to give him. As I said, we will give him a time, and of course, the first time we have is these 2 years of implementation, where we will adjust accordingly. Otherwise, if really the standard we have a problem with it, then we will decide not to consider it, at least in the list that we have in the regulation, and we will put it out of this list.
Okay. If I may add something here, that's very well highlighted, Michel, and that was the purpose of creating this whole AMC, to put some criteria there to make sure that not every pretended or so be it, that somebody decides to call an industry standard will make it through the regulation. So we had to impose some barriers to make sure that whatever we endorse is going to be solid and thorough to meet all these criteria. At the same time, we know that the more standardized the operational procedures and the training and all the activities in ground handling are going on, the easier it will be for everybody. So it's in everybody's benefit to have a standardized approach, to harmonize the operational procedures. Just think of the very good example that I'm sure you all have clear in your mind about the number of chocks and the cones set to the same aircraft type, an Airbus 319. How much sense does it make to have 19 or 20 different procedures to set the chocks and the cones in a different number or in a different place? It's not so logical, or it's not really well justified. So the more harmonization, the better it is to reduce the training costs, to reduce the number of mistakes that people can make based on those many different variations and deviations from the standards, to improve safety, to make work simpler. In the end, you will have a better operational performance if you standardize your procedure. So it's in everybody's interest probably to harmonize everything. And of course, we aim for endorsing what we want to endorse, but it's also an effort from the authors of those standards to demonstrate that they meet these criteria. So I think we have to meet halfway. And if more work needs to be done either by us who evaluate the standards or by the authors of the standards, I think it's going to be in everybody's interest to get there at one point or at the end of this evaluation, even though this evaluation may take longer than we think.
Okay, so just one more question before we move on to the next part to also involve our panelists here from the competent authorities. And please a short answer, because we want to make sure, we want to be sure that we have the 30 minutes left at the end of this webinar to answer the questions from the audience, of course. So what happens if I'm an industry standard and I ticked all those boxes in 2028? Is this then an approval that is valid forever? Or if I update my industry standard, is EASA going to look into it again?
Yeah, that's a good question. Indeed, we believe that we have to foresee a continuous evaluation. Mm-hmm. We have not defined this continuous evaluation, how it will be done exactly, but yes, there will be probably review period from the feedback we have and how the organization itself is able to manage the processes, because it's not just about a book, but it's about also the processes and how they do things.
Okay, so it's not an indefinite approval in a way.
No.
Good, yeah. Then thank you very much for answering my questions with regards to industry standards, and also thank you very much for giving us the background on what the EASA's and the member states' role is going to be in evaluating those industry standards and how is it going to be done. We mentioned this very important criteria, those 7 criteria that I think people can find back in the regulations. And now I'd like to hand over to my colleague Adina for the rest of the panel discussion with the panelists.
Thank you, Julia. So we move now to the second part of this panel discussion, which is one where we want to highlight the perspective of the competent authorities in how they conduct the oversight and how relevant it is when they oversee an organization that applies industry standards in their ground handling operations. I am reminding you in the meantime that we have already opened the first question in a poll that we created for today. We have 4 questions for you today just to verify how attentive you are. But it's also for us to know you better, our audience. So we have launched the first Slido poll. Please go to Slido and see the question, and please put in your answers. We are monitoring that, and I think we will also be able to share the results of Slido with you. So the question now, the next set of questions is going to be addressed to our panelists, to the colleagues online, the 3 colleagues from the 3 competent authorities, Barbara, Tihana, and Jonathan. So the first question to you colleagues is this. Today, how do you do with this oversight activity? If you do, because not all the member states today do have a ground handling regulation at the national level, and not all the member states in Europe today do oversee directly the ground handling activities and the ground handling organizations. So the question to you, all three, Barbara, Johnny, and Tihana, is how do you currently oversee the ground handling activities, the services of a ground handling organization or of an aircraft operator doing self-handling, and how relevant it is when those organizations apply industry standards today? I will start with Barbara.
Okay, thank you. Today we have an indirect oversight because there are no ground handling regulations. We do not have a direct oversight of ground handling. So what we do is airside inspections, for example, and the report does not go to the ground handling agent, it goes to the airline. Or if it is a ground handling agent who does not have any Swiss AOC air operator customers, the report will go to the aerodrome, because the aerodrome in Switzerland also has an obligation to make sure its aerodrome is safe. And we have additional ground handling witness inspections where we check how does the air operator follow its monitoring duties. How does he do the inspections and audits of the ground handling service providers? And of course, during base audits, AOC, MS audits, we check with the nominated person ground operations, their monitoring program and their implementation of their SMS extended to the ground handling agents. We do not have ground handling regulations. So what we use is the ground handling manual of the air operator, and we audit against that. So that's how we do it currently.
Thank you, Barbara. I move in the order of the in which I see you on our screen. Tihana, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, okay. In Croatian Civil Aviation Agency, this part is also, of course, under Air Operations Department. So they are not directly oversee the ground handling organization, of course. Instead of that, the inspectors are overseeing aircraft operator, verifying contracted services, and that they are properly managed in line with the requirements. So what does this mean? It means that there should be some clear agreements between the operator and ground handler. Services are integrated into the operator's management system, of course, and in the compliance monitoring, and that operator performs its own oversight of the provider. Those are the things that are being overseen. And the application of industry standards, it might be helpful to address the oversight, but what is important to mention is that the operator remains responsible for ensuring compliance with applicable regulations.
Thank you. That's pretty clear. Thank you, Tihana. Johnny, over to you.
Okay, so here in Ireland, we've had a ground ops inspector, a full-time ground ops inspector for over 20 years now. I'm 11 years in the role, and my predecessor was at least 10 years as well. So we have been conducting oversight of our ground handlers, but similar to my colleagues there, we do it through the Air Ops department, through the Air Ops regulations. So we are looking at the ground handler as a contracted activity of the Irish AOC. That brings its own issues in that if I'm up at an airport, which I've had before, an aircraft comes in on stand, but it's a group aircraft and it has a different flag on the back of the aircraft, I cannot look at it. I don't look really at the ground handler's management system. I'm looking to see how the airline's management system brings in the ground handler as required under the contracted activities. And with regards to industry standards, it doesn't matter if the ground handler has industry standards, it's what the airline's GOM has that I have to oversee. So similar to then, if I have a ground handler, which I've had the situation of in Dublin, that didn't handle an Irish AOC, an Irish airline, I have no requirement to go and see that ground handler whatsoever, and they never had oversight of me, which would be a significant gap, obviously. So it's only really if the airline itself applies a level of industry standards, like for example the IGOM, where I would get to consider that. But mainly no, it's just whatever the airline has written in their GOM I'm reviewing.
Yeah, that's also very clear. Thank you, Johnny, for and thank all three of you for highlighting what you're doing today. And I guess the obvious next question is, what will happen once the ground handling regulations become applicable? How will oversight be conducted? And what is going to be the relevance of the ground handling industry standards applied by, and best practices applied by ground handling organizations and self-handling operators that you will oversee? So I will also go around the clock and inviting all three of you to share with us, or one of you, because I suppose that oversight will be done the same, and we expect that oversight will be conducted the same way all over Europe. So I don't know, Barbara, maybe you would like to explain a little bit. So what is going to happen as of the 28th of March, 2028?
As of then, we have direct oversight. We have our regulation. We audit against that, which will then, I think, similar to my colleagues here, and also include the ground handling service providers, SMS. It will go deeper into the training. As of now, I only do airside inspections and check-in gate. So afterwards, it will be really the whole picture. And auditing against the regulation and the standards. So, and we will still keep airside inspections with regards to our air operators, because there is still that responsibility of the air operator. However, it will not be, it's just the airside inspections.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the rest, which is the AOC 965, but otherwise, yeah, more deeper inspections, because it includes the SMS, and now I'm asking for some training records currently, but after I will really go into the training subjects.
Thank you, Barbara. So what's clear, and what needs to be understood by our participants, by the audience, is that, of course, the aircraft operators will continue with their compliance monitoring function of their ground handling organizations, and the competent authority overseeing the aircraft operator will also look at this function. However, not so much focus will be put on that, because we will have a ground handling regulation directly applicable to ground handling organizations, and the competent authority doing direct oversight of those ground handling organizations and the services, right? This is the shift of perspective. Any one of you colleagues would like to add something? Tihana, Johnny?
The only thing I'd add to that is when I spoke earlier saying that ground handler we had in Dublin Airport that was operating for 9 years there with no oversight. Now they get oversight. And interestingly, the station manager who I knew from my previous life in industry had actually called me to say, why are you not doing oversight? They wanted oversight. He knew the benefits of good oversight. And I was actually questioning me why. And I was like, I literally have no legal remit to do this. Now I do. And that's
Absolutely.
a positive for everybody.
Agree with that.
Yeah, and the gap will be closed now because there will be nobody flying under the radar. We have been speaking and we also received many questions from the industry in the previous webinars and also outside the webinars about a risk-based oversight. If the regulations enable that, if the competent authorities are going to use a risk-based oversight, are you going to use a risk-based oversight approach? Because the regulations do enable this. What is a risk-based oversight is perhaps the colleagues, the inspectors who have a better experience than I do in overseeing can help me with this explanation. The risk-based oversight is based on evidence, is based on how well an organization demonstrates a safety performance being implemented within their organization. It's not necessarily going and verifying, ticking the boxes just for the sake of verifying the compliance, but rather focusing on the safety performance of an organization. So this would be the approach, right, that we would go forward. So the question back to you, how are you going to implement a future risk-based oversight? Will this be feasible to be implemented from the very beginning? How is this going to develop? How is this going to take place? And I would like to invite you, I don't know who would like to answer this, who would like to jump in. Johnny, maybe you would like to start?
Yep, happy to. Yes, well, I suppose if the question is, are we going to apply a risk-based oversight? Well, there's two kind of key answers to that. Well, there's two ways of answering the question. Yes is actually the significant answer. And there's two reasons to that, I should say. The first reason is, while all the people we have here listening to this, will be 458 participants now from ground handling, are starting to know all about their regulation 20 of 2025 ORGH. We as national authorities also have a regulation 23 of 25 AORGH, authority requirements, and it says as plain as day in that, in our oversight reg, the competent authority shall collect and process any information deemed useful for oversight and risk-based oversight. And within our AMCs, our acceptable means of compliance of that, it says the oversight program should follow a risk-based approach considering the data collected. So one, we have to do it. We are required to do it. Two is we want to do it. It makes sense to do it. You know, Adina spoke well there, saying what risk-based oversight is. And from our perspective as an authority, you know, it's that proactive way of focusing our audits and our inspections. So the resources that we have, and we don't have an abundance of resources, just like no ground handling organization has an abundance of resources. It allows us point those resources that we do have towards the higher risk areas. So we're not just applying a standard oversight to all entities, looking at everything, ticking a box, as Adina said. But to do that, we need to determine where those higher risk areas are. And this can only be done through analyzing data and then using that to determine the organization's risk profile. So we will do that in that first 5 years that we have to do that first cycle of oversight. We will start bringing up information. But just like we've said in previous webinars where we talk about how on day one, there is no expectation from us as an authority that the ground handlers management system will be fully working, full belt and whistles, loads of information, that it's a slow process for them to build up that information. The more information they get in there through reporting, through really promoting reporting from their staff, and to try and target those areas, see where those risk areas are before the incidents occur. All that information they build up, all those audits they do, their internal audits where they get findings, keeping in mind findings are a good thing when you're kind of identifying those gaps and divergences, so you can get to them before they become a problem. Stop that normalization of deviance of the SOPs before they're an issue. The more information you build up, that helps us as an authority to marry that with our information and start using that risk-based oversight really proactively to help the ground handlers to identify the further areas and work their system, instead of looking at one which has a wonderful training manual and having to go back and do that every 2 years or every 4 years when we know it's fine. We can just do a quick assessment of that in the future. So risk-based oversight I see as a key tool which will help us through our cooperative oversight of lessening the box ticking audits and getting more towards those really positive audits that help our management system and help our operation. So yes, we want to do it. We know the ground handlers want to do it. So we see it as a key tool.
Absolutely. Yeah. Tihana, Barbara, if you'd like to add anything else to Johnny's comment, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's really like I totally agree that, and of course, it's been stated in regulation that we will employ this model because it will give us the possibility to really build the profiling of the ground handling organization. We know that ground handling is very fragmented industry, and a lot of things are happening, and this environment is very, very, very live. And this tool will help us, and this approach will help us just to identify those areas which really needs our attention in order to be continually improved.
Thank you, Tihana. Yes.
Yes.
And a very quick highlight to what Jonathan said, the first 5 years will be important for us to collect data, to be able to go on a risk and performance-based oversight. So we have that fixed 5-year cycle, the initial cycle, and that will support us in doing the risk-based oversight.
Exactly, and thank you for saying that, Barbara, because this reminds me that maybe we should remind our audience, and maybe our audience has already noticed that we are going now a little bit beyond the topic of our webinar today, but we are answering, and I'm certain that we are answering many of the questions that we received from you from the previous webinars. So the ones who have not attended the previous webinars now have the chance to find their answer in these discussions today. So the fact that probably some of you are aware, some of you are not aware, this may be new information for you. The regulation includes a 5-year one-off period, and now I'm referring to the regulation for competent authorities, a one-off period of 5 years initially, once the regulation becomes applicable, to do a full scope oversight of all the ground handling organizations that provide services in their state. We know that some competent authorities, some countries have more ground handling organizations than others. So while 5 years may seem quite a lot of time for those smaller countries with fewer ground handling organizations, for bigger countries with many ground handling organizations, this 5-year period is absolutely necessary to go through and verify all the ground handling organizations operating in that country. And that is, again, that is going to be the basis of the future risk-based oversight. You need to know who operates out there. You need to have at least the minimum elements or the minimum information for you to build up the risk-based oversight in the future. So this was just a piece of information or a reminder for all of you. And then the cycle starts with the 4 years. So every 4 years, which can be reduced or extended depending on the safety performance of an organization. Now, I would like to go back to the topic of the webinar of today and ask you, when you will start overseeing as of 28th of March 2028, will oversight be done differently to a ground handling organization that applies industry standards compared to oversight of a ground handling organization that does not apply industry standards? Do you think that there will be a difference? How will oversight be conducted to an organization that does apply industry standards versus an organization that does not apply industry standards? What do you think? What will happen? Who should I start with? I start the inverse direction of the clock. So Johnny, go ahead, please.
Okay. It depends on which inspection it is, I guess. If you're doing an operational inspection, you're making sure they're following their own SOPs. So whether that's an industry standards, their own internal standards, that doesn't matter. At that stage, we've briefed ourselves and we know. I think if you're reviewing the work that goes into creating those processes, yes, then industry standards, we will look at it differently, in so much as they say, this is how we handle the aircraft and we do it through this standard. Well, then we already have, from the work we've done with Michel, we already have the knowledge of how that should look, that it is like well tested. That's why those seven items that we showed earlier in the AMC are why they're so important, why they're there, because it gives all of us the confidence that we know that standard now is a good standard. It's really been properly interrogated to ensure that it is a good, safe standard. So by having that there, it allows us to be able to, I guess, move on to the next part of the audit quite quickly. Whereas if you're saying we apply our own procedure, well, we need to thoroughly get into that and make sure that you've done the work in the background on that. You've done your risk assessments with the appropriate people in the room. You've done your checks and balances, and to ensure that is a safe standard for the staff to use out there in the ramp. So yeah, it does. Certainly in those initial stages and those initial first audits in that 5-year spell, Barbara and yourself, Adina, were speaking about, having the industry standard can help lessen the burden of those parts of the inspection. Absolutely.
Good point. Tihana.
Yes, but what is maybe also important to mention that anyhow, both organizations must comply with the same implementing rules laid down in Regulation 2025-20. So while industry standards can maybe inform the authority while they are doing their risk-based oversight planning, they do not replace the authority's responsibility to verify compliance with EU regulations. And another thing is that if you have the conformity with recognized industry standards or good practices, that doesn't mean that you automatically demonstrate compliance with EU regulations or requirements. And industry audits, they cannot be replaced by competent authorities' oversight responsibilities, because authority is responsible for the oversight anyhow. So what might happen here is that the use of industry standards and best practices may influence the authority's confidence level, which is important, and their risk assessment. Consequently, the ground handling organizations who are applying relevant industry standards, they may benefit from that, having more targeted or maybe and proportionate risk-based oversight, while still the legal compliance standard is remaining under the responsibility of airport authority.
Thank you.
How they would have to apply and comply with implementing rules.
Very well pointed out. Thank you very much, Tihana. Yes. Barbara, would you like to add anything else to these comments?
No, I think my colleagues have well pointed out the issue. Maybe that there is what a handling agent will not have to do, to put it in other words, won't have to prove the safety of a standard they use for how they load or chock an aircraft, and neither will the airline if they use the standard. So only when they deviate from those standards will they have to show us why it's safe. Otherwise, we just check the implementation, if they correctly implement what they say they will do. I think that's the important issue, especially if it's a ground handling agent and airline, both of them using and saying we use the standards, makes everything much easier and I think safer for the whole industry.
Absolutely, yes. I'm seeing Johnny nodding. Where you were thinking of that, or you wanted to add something to Barbara's?
No, just agreeing, absolutely agreeing. It's really the application of it then, isn't it? It's just, it moves out to the application. They still have to demonstrate that they are following the standard. That's very important.
Absolutely. And since we were talking earlier about harmonizing, standardizing, further standardizing the standards, let's say, there is this paragraph in an AMC. So we've put this not recommendation, it's stronger than a recommendation. It's included in one of the AMCs of the applicable to aircraft operators, that in case the aircraft operator deviates from the existing industry standards, they will have to reconsider whether that deviation makes sense, if it really improves the safety performance of their operation, or it's just because they think that it does. If it does address an element of their SMS, if it does mitigate a risk better or additionally, then of course it's absolutely justifiable. But what we aim for, what we had in mind when we drafted this AMC and when we discussed it with a group of experts in the past years when we drafted the regulations, was to try to harmonize the operating procedures as much as possible. So now we will ask both the aircraft operators and the ground handling organizations to look again at all those deviations and maybe give up those deviations if they don't prove to bring an additional safety benefit. it's not an isolated effort, and we know very well that the industry partners, IATA, is working in the same direction, and the IATA members and the audience in the room who are applying the IGOM and the AHM are very well aware of their initiative and what I'm talking about. This is the same effort on both sides now, the regulators and the industry, to further standardize the standards. And of course, as you very well pointed out, and you highlighted some very important points, Barbara and Tihana and Johnny, it's going to make life easier also for the competent authorities and for the industry, because the competent authorities will not ask the ground handling organizations and the aircraft operators to prove again the safety risk of everything that is included in the industry standards. That's also part of the task that we are doing now internally in EASA when we evaluate the content of those industry standards. We want to see a safety risk assessment process behind the mitigations that are included in those manuals today. So we won't have to go through the same exercise all over again when the competent authorities will oversee the industry standards applied by an organization. So I would then, and that's my next question is actually, maybe it's already redundant because Tihana has mentioned that very well in her answer before. Is there a difference between, because we received many questions and many comments from the industry about whether the competent authority oversight is the same or can be replaced by the industry audits. And now, you know that the industry applies audits. There are various organizations that audit ground handling organizations on behalf of another partner in the industry. So now let's talk about the industry audits from an aerodrome operator, the industry audits from another aircraft operator, an industry audit done on behalf of an aircraft operator by a program, and now I'm referring to the IATA's ISAGO program, which is an audit program. Yeah, I'm referring to the audit programs established through the SAE for de-icing, or IATA's DAQCP audit program for de-icing operations, anti-icing operations, or the industry audit programs coming from the JIG for refueling operations. All these industry standards, will they replace competent authority oversight? Yes or no? Are they the equivalent of competent authority oversight? Yes or no? What is the difference between them? Who would like to start?
Well, I can give some view. There is a clean distinction between these two. First, competent authority oversight, it's mandated by law. It assesses compliance against the EU implementing rules. It can raise formal findings and require corrective actions. Can imply enforcement measures. So, and it remains state's responsibility. While industry audits, they are voluntary programs. They are commercially oriented, and they are contractual tools. They assess conformity with some chosen industry standard and program. They can inform our risk-based oversight. They may be credited only if they meet these EASA conditions, some criteria we already mentioned. And also important, they cannot replace the state safety oversight. So we have like very big distinction between two of these.
Thank you, Tihana, for highlighting that. Any one of you would like to add anything else? Barbara, Johnny?
The only thing I'd add to that, 100% what Tihana said there is up, and that's really important. It is really important. One's voluntary, one is not, when you break it down, and that's really, really important. But for us as national authorities, while it won't replace, it can't replace what we do. We spoke earlier with the risk-based oversight. We spoke earlier about building information, building data. If a ground handler is using those audits within their internal management system to build their information, to build their knowledge, to build their own safety risk profile, that's a positive. And we will look at all that and see that the more information, the better. help to build that. It can only be a good thing. So it'll help inform us during our inspections, but it certainly will not, because it simply can't replace you know, any part of the regulatory structure of 2025.
And I would also like to add that our big advantage as the authority is we're local. We can go there anytime we want, especially airside. We will not need to announce that we're going airside to do the inspections. We can go deeper in certain issues. And I think what Tihana mentioned, what's really important, an industry audit program will audit against their standards. And that might be limited. So even though they might go in some areas into more details, but on the basic safety items we have defined in the ground handling regulation, we have the possibility really to go deeper and maybe also cover areas that are not covered by an industry program. So, and what Jonathan said, yes, we can really enforce the regulation. So as an authority.
Absolutely. I think you rightly pointed out, Barbara. So is it okay to say, in other words, that the scope of the industry audits is not the same or may possibly overlap partially the scope of the oversight, but they will not be completely identical and they will not replace the scope of the oversight?
Yes, and it doesn't change the obligation of authority to verify that. We have to correct. We have to map the domain and scope of audit programs with the requirements set in the ground handling regulation. That's the main thing. Also, we have to also verify another criteria in order to use these industry standards. For example, we have to know that the audit program is systematic and objective. We need to know that the auditors who provided who were involved were objective, competent, trained. Also, we have to have the access to these audit reports. And one criteria more is that we have to have the opportunity to go and ask the third-party auditor if we have some questions. So those are criteria that we will be using when we will be assessing this in this risk-based oversight approach.
Good point. Thank you.
And maybe I want to add something to something. I hope you all can understand me. I want to add something small but important to what Johnny said. That it's very important that they share the results of the industry standards audits and reports, but it's voluntary. We cannot enforce them. If they don't want, it's possible. We cannot demand them to share it with us, with the competent authorities. But it's really very much important. It's important to do that. It's voluntary, but it's helpful.
Thank you very much.
Correct.
It's good that you added this, because that actually answers my next question, which would have been, but that's absolutely good, because what happens if you oversee an organization and that organization says, no, I don't want to share the results of the audits that somebody else did to me, an industry or organization or entity. And you already answered that question. It's not mandatory, it's voluntary. It can help in building the risk-based oversight, but it's not mandatory.
It will give the competent authority also a picture of the maturity of the organization. Are they willing and are they feeling free to share the results?
Absolutely. And also answering another question that we have received many times before is, okay, now if you and EASA and the ground handling regulations, everybody is encouraging the air operators to do less audits because the ground handling industry is burdened by the amount of audits that they have to undergo every year. And then the aircraft operators would reduce the number of these audits, because we continue to say and encourage ground handling organizations to share the reports of the oversight inspections and audits with the aircraft operator being their clients. So now, again, so I'm trying to phrase the question actually now. Will the oversight audit reports, so the report of the oversight done by the competent authorities, be shared with the aircraft operators? We already know the answer because we already answered this question many times, but I would like for our audience today to repeat this, to make it very clear that yes, we promote that the ground handling organizations share the reports of their competent authority oversight with their aircraft operators, which then the aircraft operators can use trust in order to reduce the number of the audits that they do to their ground handling organizations. So is this going to be possible?
Yeah, I can just build the answer on what Jonathan said. It's the same way ground handling organizations have to build their database for SMS. Today, the air operators has no direct inspections report from oversight of the authorities. So tomorrow, if they have, then they can the same way build their database in their SMS and justify less audits somehow. In if they have no incidents, by the way, and they can build a better risk-based approach also to compliance for the air operators, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else you would like to add to Michel's reply, colleagues?
Well, maybe just it's one thing that it might be valuable to mention is these interfaces, which is the phrase that regulation uses, and I think it's till now it's been underestimated. So what focus will be on these interfaces, meaning that with this regulation, this will be the last puzzle in the story, because it will interconnect with all other actors in the environment of the ground handling, meaning that information sharing will be better. Safety-related information will be shared maybe easily. Reporting will be encouraged. So there are a lot of positive impacts of this. But I think that we will have to wait a bit to see the results and the effect of it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tihana. Now I'd like to continue in this line and try to exploit this topic of conversation even more. What happens in case you go there, oversee, you do an inspection or an audit of a ground handling organization? They share the reports of the industry audits with you, and you see a discrepancy, or at the end of the oversight of your inspection or your audit, you see there is a difference between the results that you get from the oversight compared to the results that ground handling organization has through an industry audit. One of them is higher or is more, let's say, more positive. The other one is more negative. What then? Do they have to align all the time? Or simply it's absolutely a normal situation for the competent authority oversight results to be different from an industry audit result? What do you think? What do you say? So who would like to start?
Yeah, well,
Feel free, Johnny.
Go ahead and then
Okay.
Feel free, Johnny.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I think all I would say, anybody who's worked in compliance or done any kind of an inspection, an operational inspection particularly, knows that it's just a snapshot of the day. You can see good, you can see bad. I think if if somebody's showing me what they deem to be a poor industry audit, I might look at an audit with lots of findings and see them with a really good root cause analysis and it closed very well and informing their systems, their training and all that. I would see that as a really good thing. I would see that as people understanding the benefit of oversight and using it to improve their operation. But if they show me a poor audit and I have a good audit, then I might look and see, well, again, okay, but that just says to me that it was an on the day thing. Or if that's the other way around, I'll see it that way as well. Look, if you're continually showing me audits that have no findings, if you tell me you have 10 audits and you have no findings in any of the audits, I'm going to start questioning the auditors in that situation. That there's nobody is that good, so that's a separate issue. But I really, unless you're getting into horrendous stuff, there's no such thing as a bad audit. Really, it's how you deal with that audit is whether it's bad or good. And then if we're going to have differences, of course we are. I could go there one day myself and have an audit and come out with no findings, and the next day I have 10 findings. That's just how inspections work. That's why it's just important how we deal with what comes up. And if we deal with those situations positively, use them to inform our management system and our operational systems and our training and whatever those findings come out of, then it's a real positive. It's using the information, it's using the data to build up your systems and make them better, make them safer, make them stronger.
Thank you. Good point. Thank you, Johnny. I would like, just give me a second because I would like to launch the last question in the poll for today before I move on to another question that I would like to ask you. So just a second, please. Since we asked you what would be the benefits, what do you think are the benefits of the industry standards? Now, the next question would be, what do you think are your 3 top obstacles or difficulties in applying them? So please go ahead with the poll that we just opened now with the question. And in the meantime, I have one more question, or maybe 2 if we have time, and then we open the questions from Slido. We've been hearing a lot the discussion about whether the competent authority oversight will cover the occupational health and safety. Is this part of the oversight? Because sometimes the difference, it's very difficult to put a clear boundary between an event that is considered to be related to the health and one event that is considered to be related to the safety or to the flight safety or to the safe operation in ground handling. So is this going to be covered in the oversight that you will do in the future? Health, occupational health and safety.
Shall I?
Yes, please, Barbara.
It is not directly an area that is covered by the regulation, so it will not be audited by us. However, there are a lot of health and safety issues that have a interaction with our safety ground handling regulation. So in case where the 2 come together, it will certainly be part of our audits. And it might go also into an area where it's more an observation, an area of improvement, but where it's directly attached to a safety regulation, then per se the HSE, the health and safety, is covered as well. So it might need in future also some talks between those agencies, health and safety and CAA. I guess that'll come up at one point.
Absolutely. These are good points that we will have to investigate how much we can improve this dialogue between organizations and entities, and sometimes even governmental entities that are responsible for 2 different things, because in aviation, both of them combined, we are responsible for one, but we may not be responsible for the other, and how to ensure that the 2 talk to each other. That's a challenging thing also, because I would like to remind you that for some events, we cannot even capture them very well and consider them to be accidents or incidents in accordance with our European regulations or with the ICAO Annex 13. some events do not fall in the definition of an accident or an incident. Because of that, they are considered to be occupational health and safety events or accidents or incidents. But what we can promise is that we will tackle the safety reporting in another webinar. So stay tuned in the coming webinars. This is a hugely interesting topic, and we receive many questions about that. So which deserves a separate webinar on its own. So on safety reporting. And I think with this we have covered, or at least we have to close the panel discussion, which would, I think you colleagues and dear participants in the event have found it as interesting and useful as we have. Now we would like to open the questions, so we will get prepared to answer as many of the questions that you put in Slido as possible before we reach 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Maybe Adina, just to intercept here, I think it would be good if all the participants can see a little bit the answers that everybody has provided to the poll, because it also gives them an opportunity to see. Let me just see if I can share the results.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, here. I can present that here exactly. Let me see. No, I cannot.
No.
This is the, since I. Yeah, no. I thought it's easy for me to show the first question is how your organization applies industry standards and best practices for ground handling. We had 213 votes. Unfortunately, I have difficulties to share with you the results of the votes. I think the majority.
Let's try to share that.
Maybe it works better on your end.
Yeah.
On my side, I cannot share the results.
So are we going to go and dive into the first question maybe in the meantime until I share?
Yes. Let's go to the questions. Let's go to the open questions. We are going to share the poll results. Let's do it like that. We are going to share the poll results with all of you via the analytics that we have, a Slido. It generates a really nice PDF, and then everybody can see the results of the polls that we have done.
We will publish the poll results as we did for the previous webinars.
So now we are having the questions. I already answered some of the questions while you were speaking because I thought it was good. I also answered one question in the wrong way, but I have corrected that as well. So thank you for letting me know. So yeah, here are the most prominent questions. The first one is from Bartosz Fibinier. I'm not sure if I pronounce your name correctly. And it asks whether the activity of the ground handler A is largely influenced by the aerodrome and aircraft operator manuals. And the experience that you have seen, Bartosz says that aerodrome and aircraft operators often have overlapping or different instructions for the ground handler. So which instructions are now binding for the ground handler if they are different? And you also give a very concrete example, for example, fueling safety instructions. So let's take your example, fueling safety instructions differently described in the aerodrome manual and in the aircraft operator manual. What should the ground handler do? Who would like to answer that question?
Okay, Tihana, Johnny, and Barbara, please let us know if you'd like to answer or to jump into or to add something. If not, we will do that. One of us in the room, I could take this one, or
I can.
Yes, please go ahead, Barbara.
Start. Okay, yes. I can start. Fueling is a very good example where you really might have you might have a standard, and although also an air operator procedure and an aerodrome procedure, and as of now, the aerodrome procedure would top everything else, as they have their specificities, the airport bylaws, and otherwise it's the air operator. But we would hope that all three of them can also talk to each other. You have the aerodrome AOC, so maybe an aerodrome does have a procedure that nobody else thinks it's worth the while, but maybe has very good reasons why time, for example, needed for fire and rescue to get to an aircraft, etc. So I think that is if my colleagues have something to add here, but I think that's basically a hierarchy that could come into place.
Yeah, I would just add that regulation expects formal coordination via service level agreements. So this is this is a good example of these interfaces which are foreseen with the regulation. And those procedures will have to be the part of the ground handling manual. So of course, coordination, fine tune, and just being aware of what procedure is exactly should be fine-tuned, I would say, if there is an overlapping. But anyhow, okay, we have aircraft operator procedures here involved, but it will not change the responsibility of aircraft operator to be responsible for its aircraft. It will stay. We have aerodrome operator. Okay, he will still be responsible for RAM safety and movement area safety. That will also not change, but the coordination of the procedure while fueling is in process will have to be determined and reflected in ground handling manual.
Very good.
Yeah, I think just to add there as well, looking at the broader, not just the fueling side of the house, because this is a question that comes up with most of the procedures. As Tihana said there, the aircraft operator manual will always take precedence. It's their risk. I think that's how we say it in the regulation. However, it's questions like this which are the reason we have a regulation. And that was because without ground handlers having their own mandated management system that's overseen by a national authority, aerodrome and the aircraft operators had to have everything. The risk was all theirs, they owned it. Now we have this regulation that puts the ground handler on the same level with the same competent authority, overseeing them with the same management system regulation, which now allows for mainly the aircraft operator. Most aerodromes won't actually dictate exactly how you handle an aircraft. They'll talk about what you must do around the ramp and on that piece of apron. But the aircraft operations manual does. So now they know in the fullness of time that we have this regulation that they are overseeing. They can now trust the ground handlers' procedures to take precedence of their manual, and that will hopefully, with the people in the room being open to that we can start getting to the point where we can lessen these kind of issues of a disagreement on procedures and allow the experts, the subject matter experts, being the ground handlers, to apply their procedure, which has been overseen by the national authority the same way the airline is.
Absolutely, very good, very well pointed out. What I would add to this very important question is maybe if you look from the, I don't know, if you have a wider angle, you would think that sometimes they can be contradicting one another. These three different responsibilities of three different entities or actors involved in this interface. What is the overarching element of a regulation is in the basic regulation that's even above the air ops, the ground handling, or the aerodrome regulations, because it's a higher legal level. That regulation says that the ground handling organization shall follow the instructions and procedures of the aircraft operator, and there's no way around it. Also, the basic regulation says that the ground handling organization must follow the procedures applicable to it as an aerodrome user coming from the aerodrome operations manual. What happens particularly in this case of fueling safety instructions or refueling operations, every actor has its own responsibilities and its own tasks. Very rarely do they overlap. If they overlap and are contradicting, then this ground handling regulation coming to fit as the last piece of the puzzle enables the ground handling organization to challenge those contradictions.
Exactly.
From the point of view of the ground handling regulation. And then, of course, we go back to, so who's right? Whose procedures do I apply? Who takes precedence? Is it the aerodrome operator, is it the aircraft operator, or the ground handler? It depends on where that contradiction is. It depends on what part of the procedure we are talking about as a challenge, because the aerodrome operator will never tell the aircraft operator how to refuel its aircraft. That's exclusively the responsibility and the specialty of the aircraft operator. Again, the into-plane fuel provider that's their job to know how to refuel the aircraft. It's probably not going to be the aerodrome operator again to come and tell the into-plane fuel provider how to do the operation of refueling. At the same time, the aerodrome operator is responsible to maintain safety on the apron during the turnaround. So then the aerodrome operator has to say, both you, these guys, the airline or the aircraft operator and the ground handler must make sure that every evacuation exit is free of any vehicle and any obstacle in case something happens during refueling on the ground, with passengers on board or without passengers on board, boarding or disembarking. That's the responsibility of the aerodrome operator. Yeah, so it's not for the aircraft operator to say anything. It's not for the ground handler. They have to comply. In the end, the safety on the apron being the responsibility of the aerodrome operator. When these contradictions appear, they will have to be raised up. They will have to be discussed together, not in isolation. And of course, if no agreement can be reached, if there's no together way forward, then you ask for the competent authorities' advice and support. But please remember that the competent authority is not a referee. So you, of course, you will go to the competent authority, ask for their advice in case you discuss, you don't reach any agreement, you don't agree on, okay, which entity, which actor in this three-phase interface activity takes precedence, or that procedure has to follow to take precedence over the other procedures. You always can involve your competent authority in that. But the first thing is communicate, talk to each other, discuss where the problems are.
Okay. The next one?
Next one. Let's see. Will the competent authority recognize audit and inspections performed by IFQP, DAQCP, ISEGO as part of compliance? And can the above replace a part of the audit performed by the competent authority? I think we answered this question. Would you like to highlight the answer, colleagues?
The only thing I'd highlight is that it cannot replace part of the audit performed by the competent authority. It's important to stipulate that.
It cannot. Yeah.
That
was a short answer, I think.
Yeah.
Then the next question.
No, this one. Yeah, this one we already had. Next one.
I'm trying to highlight that. Yes. Now, activity of. Sorry, why doesn't it?
We had that.
Let's close them. Okay, now this one.
Yes.
For airlines who are not impacted by the EASA ground handling regulations as no self-handling, what is expected from these airlines to audit these handling agents? Do these airlines need to audit the handling providers based on the EASA ground handling requirements? So we are talking about third country operators. That's my understanding of this question.
Sure.
No.
I don't think so.
No,
I don't think so. No.
No, we are speaking about airlines who have no self-handling.
Airlines who have no self-handling means that those airlines use the third-party services of another handling organization.
I think the question is whether, let's take one example, whether SAS airline flying to Köln-Bonn Airport, which is around the corner from where we are, whether they need to use the EU ground handling regulations to do their own audit of the ground handling services provided to SAS at Köln-Bonn Airport.
Thank you for clarifying.
So that is the question, I think. Whether they can use their own auditing, assessment,
Okay.
checklist, or whatever they have, or whether they have to now switch their
Yes.
audit approach to audit against the EU ground handling regulation.
Thank you, Julia, for clarifying that. Now it reminds me of something that I presented in other fora at other ground handling conferences, which is the following. The aircraft operator is not expected to do the oversight that the competent authority should do. So the aircraft operator only needs to verify to apply its compliance monitoring function. It's not expected that the aircraft operator will have to verify whether the ground handling organization providing services to its aircraft complies with the regulation of ground handling. No, that's the prerogative of the member state's competent authority. What the aircraft operator is expected to do is to monitor that the ground handling services are done in accordance with its own operating procedures and instructions. Yeah. So, and this is part of the compliance monitoring function of the aircraft operators, which they do today. What we said before, that the aircraft operators can consider the audit results done by the competent authorities in their own verification of the ground handler is valid. So this remains valid, what we said before. The aircraft operator can reduce its own audits and inspections considering the results done by the competent authority already, oversight already conducted of that ground handling organization, which will enable the aircraft operator to focus more on what's important for them. Yeah, so it's a win-win situation. The airlines will not have to spend as much time as before in verifying everything from a ground handling organization. Training requirements done by the competent authority. SMS done by the competent authority in accordance with the ground handling regulation. So then the airline is able then to focus more on what's important for them. Is the ground handler applying my procedures as I tell them to do? Yes or no? They can do a spot check, for example, of some training records if they want, but they can reduce in the future their own audits to the ground handling organizations if they take into account the oversight results from their competent authority. I think that is answering the question, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the next one
is
I already provided a reply during the panel discussion.
I think I cannot show the.
I think first you have to deselect and then you can select
Deselect,
the next one.
okay.
Yeah. So it's if the organization is already IGOM compliant, will this be recognized as being compliant with the ground handling regulation, at least regarding the ground handling ops part? And the answer that I provided is basically what you have explained, Michel, is that there is no automatic crediting, but EASA has a process which has to do with the evaluation of the industry standards. So, are there any additions?
Implement what is in the ICOM. It's not just a question of documentation.
Copy paste.
Yes.
Yes, I think that's important. I think what they're asking there is, yes, we follow the IGOM, so are we okay? You might be okay within the management system parts of the IGOM, the safety assessment of them, but you will still have to be overseen to ensure you are using those procedures appropriately and correctly and safely.
Exactly, very well. And this is something to highlight what Tihana has said before in an answer to another question. If an organization applies IGOM and AHM, does it mean that that organization already complies with the regulation? That's a very frequently asked question. No, it doesn't mean that. It means that an organization complies with the regulation only when the competent authority is satisfied of that. However, if a ground handling organization implements IGOM, implements AHM, which we have already evaluated and found to be, yes, they are addressing the scope of the regulations. So if an organization applies the IGOM, is compliant with IGOM and AHM, that makes it a few steps closer to demonstrating compliance with the regulations. But that again has to be verified through the oversight by the competent authority. That's a big step, that's a help for the organization, but it doesn't, you cannot put the sign equal between I apply IGOM, therefore I am compliant with the regulation. It doesn't work like that. I am very, very close to demonstrating my compliance with the regulation, but that has to be confirmed by the competent authority in the oversight.
Yes, and it will be very valuable input to our risk-based model, like profiling the ground handling organization.
Exactly. Yeah. Next question. How to address overlapping areas, SMS interfaces among ground handling organizations, aerodrome operators, and air operators? Who wants to answer? Would you like to jump in, Tihana?
Yeah, okay, SMS. So now it becomes, now with ground handling regulation, we will have this mandatory SMS also for ground handling or ground handling service providers. So this overlapping means that we will have to, no we, but the organizations and the actors, everybody involved will have to evaluate and see what is the overlapping, and it will, because there will not be sense to overlap anymore, because every party will have its own responsibility in this chain, in these activities. So overlappings should be managed through interfaces which should be recognized, analyzed, and risk assessed.
Absolutely.
100%. The vast majority of overlaps will be because there was no regulation for ground handlers. Now there's a regulation, we can get together and say, okay, we don't need now. The aerodrome does not need to. It doesn't have a responsibility here. The aircraft operator does not have a responsibility here. It's the ground handler's responsibility. And it's a good thing. It'll get those SMSs talking to each other, which is what we want. And they will be able to, remove those overlaps, I think, in nearly every case. And where they can't, it'll just take them to get into a room together and ensure that they're aligned anyway.
Spot on, Johnny. I think this is the essence of the answer to this question, which is super important. So far, because there was no ground handling regulation in place, I think nobody ever monitored how well or how much the overlapping is among the three actors involved in that, and if they are overlapping too much, or if the overlapping areas or the SMS interfaces contradict one another in some points. With the latest addition to the overall picture of the ground handling rules, we will be able to monitor and get more feedback about where those contradicting interfaces are. And as any other piece of documentation ever written, the ground handling regulation, the aerodrome regulation, the aerops regulation, the fact that they are regulations doesn't mean that they are perfect, just as the fact that industry standards written there being implemented for many years are perfect. Everything is subject to improvement, and the industry standards are also constantly improved. They undergo an amendment and improvement almost every year or every 2 years, I don't know. So it's going to be with the regulations. If we spot through this oversight that there are some elements which contradict or overlap where it's not necessary to contradict, to overlap or remove contradictions, if need be, we will have to investigate whether the rules are proper, are good enough, or whether we need to amend them. So, but I think that we will get more and more feedback on these questions in the future. Michel?
Yeah, you just wanted to add that SMS is about risk assessment. And the risk assessment can be viewed differently from one actor and the other one. So what we call overlapping areas are not necessarily overlapping in terms of assessment.
Yes.
And therefore, the one who sees the risk will take action. That's the sense of SMS.
Yes, exactly. Very good. Yeah. Next question. As an aircraft operator, we perform load supervision under EASA Air Ops. In light of the EASA ground handling regulation, we request clarification whether this activity falls within the ground handling scope or remains exclusively covered by Air Ops, avoiding any double regulation. So that's a very good question. Thank you, Alexander, for this question. We have the following. The load control process has several steps. We know that very well. Some steps of the load control process are related to the load planning. Load planning, meaning mass imbalance calculations, preparation of the documentation for the loading of the aircraft, the load sheets, the LIR. This step of the load control process remains under full control and responsibility of the aircraft operator and is included in Regulation 965. What is not in Regulation 965 and is included now in the ground handling regulation are the other steps of the load control process, the steps that actually take place at the aircraft, at the aerodrome, at the aircraft, which means loading supervision and the loading and unloading proper. These are included in the ground handling regulation now, and they are under the responsibility of the ground handling organization. Of course, how the loading and unloading of the aircraft takes place has to follow the procedures of the aircraft operator. As I mentioned before, the basic regulation says ground handling shall be done as per the procedures of the aircraft operator. But the ground handling organization itself has an SMS. It performs a safety risk assessment of the loading and unloading itself. It has to produce its own mitigations to the loading process and to the loading activities and the loading supervision. So they will now, as of 28th of March 2028, the loading supervision will fall under the responsibility of the ground handling organization, and this part is covered in the ground handling requirements. So they are in the ground handling regulation. They are not included in the 965 for AirOps. They are only in the ground handling reg. Okay, so if the aircraft operator does self-handling, then of course the aircraft operator has to follow Regulation 20, ground handling, yeah? If the aircraft operator contracts out the service to a third-party ground handling organization, then that ground handling organization is responsible to comply with the regulation, and therefore the loading supervision is done in compliance with the ground handling regulation. I hope that that was clear. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We still have 2 minutes, so this is going to be the last question we can answer in this webinar. Which organization is the ground handling service provider if the aerodrome operator owns and provides this equipment, but another organization performs the operation with this equipment, transfer of passengers with reduced mobility? What conditions must be met for the aerodrome operator to be considered the ground handling service provider in this scenario? I think the regulation explains that pretty well. If the aerodrome operator only provides the equipment, but does not operate the equipment, the aerodrome operator is not considered to be a ground handling organization. So only the entity that operates that equipment is considered a ground handling organization, has to comply with the ground handling regulation, and has to declare. Otherwise, it's not. So for the aerodrome operator to be considered a ground handling organization, that aerodrome operator has to also operate the equipment with its own personnel. One more minute. Do we go and answer one more question? AMC Orogen asks the operator to reduce the differences between its own ground handling operating procedures and those industry standards by conducting a safety risk assessment. How can a safety risk assessment reduce differences? Shouldn't the operator rather perform a gap analysis instead?
I tried to answer the question, so now you can correct me. I've said that the safety risk assessment will compare the operators and the ground handlers' operating procedures, and by comparing them, of course, that will result in a comparison table, probably highlighting the differences, the gaps, and the commonalities. And after such a table is produced, call it a gap analysis or whatever you like, of course, then the operator needs to use that information and develop a safety risk assessment. So the gap analysis, in a way, is just one step towards
Yeah.
the safety risk assessment. So it would not be helpful to rewrite the AMC and just say, do a gap analysis, and that's the solution. No, the question is, what are you going to do with that analysis? You do a safety risk assessment. That is the end result that you want to have, making sure that you have assessed the risk of having so many gaps or so many overlaps or so many differences. It really depends. So our aim is to make sure that the operator performs a safety risk assessment. Of course, in doing that, they will probably do a gap analysis. They will do an analysis of the commonalities and of the differences.
Yeah, you can say it the other way around.
Exactly that.
If you don't have a good reason to have this difference from a safety perspective, then you have to change it.
Exactly.
So I think with that we answer the question.
Yeah.
Thank you. Perfectly.
So as usual, we will publish the answers to these questions on the event page, along with the poll results. And also we have a piece of news for you before we close the webinar and before we thank you for your attendance, and before thanking our panelists for the very good discussion and comments and clarifications. We will also have a new ground handling web page very soon. Probably that will happen before Easter period, if the Easter break, or if not, then soon after. So stay tuned, check the EASA website, because we will have a new ground handling page with all this information and useful links to the Q&As, to the future list of FAQs, frequently asked questions, as well as safety awareness and safety promotion material linked to the high safety risks in ground handling operations. So we will encourage you to go on the EASA website and check the future new ground handling webpage. And with this being said,
and next to the Q&As and the answers on the Slidos, also the recording of this.
Thank you very much, Paul. Yes.
Meeting is being published on the website.
Yeah. It can be viewed, it can be listened to also later on the EASA Together for Safety channel. So thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much.
Great discussion.
For your participation.
See you next time. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you all.